Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the state of the Elemental Shaman in 11.1 and Season 2 of The War Within. Now, before we get going, I just want to say I'll be talking about a number of different topics that pertain to Elemental, so if you want to check the chapters in the description, if something interests you specifically, you can just jump to that. But otherwise, we're going to just jump in with a recap of all the changes that happened to the Elemental Shaman coming from Season 1 going into Season 2 from the PTR. So the first and biggest change that I think that's going to affect most people is going to be the change to Primordial Wave. So now Primordial Wave no longer is a flame shock. It does not spread a flame shock anymore. It only triggers on the flame shocks you already have out. So you'll need to put your flame shocks out first, and then when you press Primordial Wave, it now does damage to all of your flame shock targets. It's very, very hard to use well. They did say that the change was made so that because Primordial Wave was a complicated spell to manage and get optimal usage of, this makes it much harder because now we have one less way to spread flame shocks. It is very difficult to get to your max flame shock amount, which is 6. The only way to really get there effectively is by using Liquid Magma Totem, Totemic Recall, and then another Liquid Magma Totem, and that can only be done once every 2 minutes. So it is very difficult to get optimal usage out of with this change. It also says now deals a high amount of damage to all targets affected by your flame shock. High amount of damage is incorrect. This does almost no damage whatsoever. So Primordial Wave has kind of been gutted. It's basically impossible to get good usage out of in a Mythic Plus environment now, so it's going to be kind of removed from all of those Mythic Plus builds that you'll be seeing in general. I do think there might be some usage if you're playing Farseer in Mythic Plus, which might be a thing for dungeons like Theater of Pain and Workshop because of the low target count nature of it. And with Farseer, you are going to still be playing Primordial Wave, mainly just because of the fact it summons an Ancestor. So there might be some experimentation with our low target count situations playing Farseer, because Farseer is going to be our go-to for raid, and then therefore has to use Primordial Wave because of its being tied to an Ancestor. So the biggest thing to take away here is Primordial Wave. It just feels really, really bad to use now with this change. It does very little damage, and if it wasn't tied to that Ancestor, we probably wouldn't play it at all. So keep that in mind as we go through this. We'll talk about the gameplay effect of it a little bit more as we get into the builds video that I'll be doing a little bit later. But for right now, just know that Primordial Wave feels really bad to use. And flame shock spreading as a whole has gotten much worse with this change. Another big change is that they completely removed Ancestral Guidance. Ancestral Guidance was basically you press it, you do damage, and you get a lot of big healing off of it. That's just completely gone now. The one thing that they kind of are trying to do to like make up for it is the fact that they did buff Healing Stream Totem by 80%. Woo! It's not going to cover that much. Healing Stream Totem is still going to feel very like basically like Earth Shield in a lot of ways, where you just kind of throw it up there because you know it's doing something, but it's not always felt. Basically the same thing here. That's obviously a huge nerf to our group utility. But it just kind of is what it is. Healing Stream Totem is going to be something that you can pick up. Probably will be used a little bit more than it was in Season 1, obviously. But it's still not going to be the big healing. It's really just going to be more of a passive healing. A lot of times you're basically just going to be sniping your healer and basically contributing to your healer's overheal bar, you know, like how much they have overhealed, because this thing is just kind of getting in the way more than anything. But it can be helpful as like just a movement global. It will be better than just pressing like a naked frost shock or something like that. So definitely worth considering, but it's not going to make or break anything. The next big thing, and the last thing we'll talk about here, is the Deeply Rooted Elements change is now based off of your Maelstrom spent as opposed to just using a spender. This makes it slightly better to use Elemental Blast in situations where you would be playing Elemental Blast because it spends more Maelstrom. This gives it a slightly higher chance to proc a Deeply Rooted Element Ascendance. One other thing to note with the change to Deeply Rooted Elements is that there's no longer any bad luck protection on it. Before, each time that you used a spender and you didn't get a Deeply Rooted Elements proc, you would slowly build up behind the scenes you'd get more and more likely to proc a Deeply Rooted Elements. That has been completely gotten rid of. It's now just going to be completely random again, which means that you can get back-to-back procs sometimes, and then sometimes you might go 5 minutes without it. So It's going to feel a lot more like season 1 of Dragonflight, where it was like this. However, I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad. Elemental is in a much better place than it was in season 1 of Dragonflight. So I don't think it'll be that negative, but you will feel it from time to time, especially in actually just in Raid and Mythic Plus. You will notice sometimes it just doesn't proc, but when it does proc, it's going to feel like you just suddenly got a steroid injection. So it's going to lead to situations where people are going to be pointing out, like if you look at the 99th percentile in a Raid environment, like people are going to be pointing and looking, oh, Elemental's doing so much more damage, you guys are fine. But those top logs from the 99th percentile are going to just be ones that get more deeply rooted elements procs as opposed to ones that get 0. So the variance in our DPS is going to be all over the place because of this. It will probably average out to be fine overall, but it will feel bad because of that lack of bad luck protection. But if you're someone who likes high rolling or hoping to high roll on Ascendance, then this change might be better. Overall, I haven't really liked it. There's been some times in Mythic Plus where I've gotten 3 procs in a row and it's just, you're just go God tier for a while, but it's very rare that happens. But those are the 3 biggest changes to Elemental Shaman over the course of the PTR. You'll notice there's no like real numbers tuning other than this healing stream thing, and that's because we haven't gotten any. So we're kind of in the same place from a numerical standpoint, but there's some other obviously things that are changing as well with our new tier bonus, which we will talk about next. So looking at our new tier set, your spells and abilities, for the 2 set, that your spells and abilities have a chance to hit a jackpot that summons a storm elemental for 9.6 seconds. Casting Ascendance always hits a jackpot. So this also includes your Ascendances that are procced from deeply rooted elements, meaning like Ascendance and deeply rooted elements are going to be basically required in all builds as they have been moving forward. The 4-piece is when you summon or extend a storm elemental, including from your 2-piece, and then also when you summon it normally. Your Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, and Lava Burst deal 20% increased damage for 8 seconds. This is basically a nothing burger. It's just buffing your builders for 8 seconds. It's nothing crazy. If you are playing Stormbringer, this will also buff your Tempest as well. Right now I'm currently in a Farseer build, so it's not showing that. It also buffs Tempest as well. Your 2-piece is something you want to get ASAP, as fast as you possibly can. Obviously, don't use your catalyst charges before you finish the week or anything like that. Use that to finish off any kind of gearing after you've gone through the raid if you're raiding. But you want to get this 2-piece as fast as you possibly can. It is a big burst of damage, or a big burst of your, or a big chunk of your damage is going to be coming from your 2-piece. However, your 4-piece is not important at all. You can just slowly get it over time. Wouldn't worry about that one so much. The 2-piece is really where it's at. So very big, strong ties to that Storm Elemental, which means if we're looking at a single target build is going to look something like this for Raid. There's obviously going to be like maybe 1 or 2 changes based on certain situations, or if there's any tuning after I put out this video. But as a general starting point, something like this for a single target build is going to be really important. You'll notice the big changes here being things like Elemental Unity is really important. You can have a very high uptime on Storm Elemental. Elemental Unity is going to be something that's going to be useful in all builds because you can have uptime, at least in my Mythic Pluses that I've done. We can even look at this one here. I don't even know what dungeon this was. This was a damage overall from something. We can look at the uptime of the Storm Elemental buff. Unity doesn't show up here, but if we're just looking at Wind Gust, as you can see, we're kind of in the middle of my screen there, 51% uptime on Wind Gust. It's even higher than that in general, but 50% uptime on Wind Gust is obviously you're having even more Elemental Unity uptime than even that. So very good talent from there. All of these elemental talents are very good. Echoes of the Elementals, which also helps with that as well. So every time that you have a Storm Elemental out, including the ones procced from your 2-piece, every time they expire, you get another one for 12 seconds, especially when you combine it with Everlasting Elementals. So all of these elemental talents are very powerful. One problem with using Primal Elementalists, as you might have known, is the fact that you can't really use Earth Elemental because you have a chance to, you might override your Storm Elemental, but also if you have Earth Elemental out and then you proc a Storm Elemental, it will override the Earth Elemental. Now you can still use it. A lot of times when you're using this as a defensive option, you really only need it for a couple seconds anyway. It's just very unlikely that this is going to last its full duration. So kind of unfortunate interaction there. The damage that you're getting from Primal Elementalist is going to be too good to pass up in most situations, especially if your only concern is its interaction with Earth Elemental. it's just not worth trading off for not playing Primal Elementalist. Little unfortunate there, but in general, this is basically what it's going to look like. We're not going to talk about how this plays in its entirety. It plays very similar to how a Farseer build plays on live right now, so nothing is really changing from that perspective if you've played Farseer builds. And if you've only been playing Stormbringer builds, it's also not that different from this either. You're not really changing anything. The 2-piece and 4-piece do not dictate any kind of playstyle changes. You're mainly just kind of pressing what's off cooldown, building up to your spenders, using your Ice Fury when you have it. Make sure you're proccing your Fusion of the Elements and going from there, building up, making sure that you're using a good Ascendance window and getting as much as you can out of Ascendance. But outside of that, like, nothing has really changed moving from Season 1 to Season 2. But I will be coming out with a video on how it plays at a later time. We're just kind of going over the big state of Elemental. Moving into a well, before we move into it, I just want to say real quick that this is something we're probably going to be playing for most of the raid. The only big changes here is we might find ways to pick up Liquid Magma Totem, maybe moving just the point of Elemental Equilibrium over. There might be another point that might be better. Maybe moving Power of the Maelstrom over to Liquid Magma Totem, something like that. One of those 2 points might be worth picking up for Liquid Magma Totem in the situations where AoE does matter to some degree. But overall, this is going to be kind of your standard build. You might even take Herald of Storms in situations like that, like for Styx, which is the Katamari Damacy boss where you're rolling on the ball. There might be situations like that, but most of these bosses are really built around single target with some additional ad cleave, and because of that, really just chain lightning spam with and using Stormkeeper, kind of like saving Stormkeeper for those kind of moments. It's really all you're going to need for the raid outside of 1 or 2 specific situations. So with that being said, we will talk about the builds for Mythic Plus. So this is going to be kind of our template for a Mythic Plus build. There are obviously some changes that you can make as well to this if you don't like certain things, but this will probably be what I end up using for the most part. You can play Elemental Blast or Earthshock. Either one of these is fine. I like playing with Elemental Blast when I'm using Stormbringer, but you can obviously use Earthshock as well. That's fine. Again, in Throne or Theater of Pain and Workshop, there might be some more experimentation to try to do better on low target counts, but just as a general template for every other Mythic Plus, this is kind of what I would suggest, again, playing into those elementals, as well as Everlasting Elements and Unity, getting as much as we can out of this. And I would suggest switching to this even now, like before you even get your 2 and 4 piece for the new set. Just go ahead and start using this, because using Primordial Wave after the change just feels so awful, and the juice is really not worth the squeeze even before we get the 2 and 4 piece. So using something like this is what I would suggest moving into this season as well. There's a couple points you can move around in here. If you're not a big fan of Echoes of the Great Sundering, you can just take that out and put it somewhere else. There's not a great place for it, but if you just really absolutely hate it, you can really just shove this point pretty much anywhere. If that's Eye of the Storm or Power of the Maelstrom or honestly, if you're just trying to get rid of it, you can. However, Echoes of the Great Sundering is going to be extremely powerful, especially if you're playing with Elemental Blast. But just in general, it gives you so much extra cleave, and it is actually a single target boost as well. So I would suggest using it, but if you absolutely hate it, you can move that point elsewhere, and it won't like completely crush your damage, but it definitely will be a hit to it. So this is kind of what I'm thinking as a setup for Mythic Plus. So let's kind of talk just a little bit about where Elemental is landing in all of this situation with the raid and whatnot. So for the raid, Elemental is kind of looking fairly mid. It's not looking too great. It's not looking too bad. Yeah, it's going to be really hard to compare Elemental coming off of the season we just had in Season 1 of The War Within, because Elemental has been doing so good. It's really hard to hope for it to be in the same place. It's probably going to be closer to mid, maybe a little bit above mid, in my opinion. It has looked to be slightly above that, but it's not going to be nearly as good as it was this past season. A lot of the reason for that is just every other class has gotten tuning, moving them up a little bit more, as well as the raid is just not really situated for Elemental. There's a lot of situations where there are ads that spawn, but they are so spread out. Other than the first boss, the ads that do exist on other bosses are very spread and or require focused damage, like on Styx, like on the One-Armed Bandit. Both of those have situations where ads spawn, and you're going to want to focus down those targets quickly, but you're going to need to do it with single target damage because they're so spread out. So that does kind of pose an issue for Ellie. We just don't have that level of spread cleave. If you don't have a way to do a lot of like spread out damage to a bunch of different enemies, it's going to be hard to like really boost your damage on that. That's not really that important though. The damage to the boss is what really matters, but it just look like there are a bunch of other specs and classes that are going to be passing elemental in the single target category. Enhance is also going to be extremely good again, and will probably be better than us for those kind of situations as well. Just kind of an unfortunate situation. Again, I think Elemental will be fine as long as you feel confident with it. If you're a strong player on it, I think it'll be more than fine to pick up. It's just not going to be nearly as good as it was in Season 1. With Mythic Plus on the other side of things, I feel like Elemental's in a much better position overall, just because it was already doing so good in Mythic Plus. Obviously overshadowed again, like it was before, by Enhance, but I think Elemental is still doing extremely well in Mythic Plus situations. A lot of people are talking about that Stormbringer going into this season is just not doing very good with single target damage. That's not really something that I have seen, at least in a Mythic Plus environment, because of the fact that other classes that need to pick up talents for their AoE are also having to give up single target damage too. I don't feel like Elemental is just like super behind on bosses and like really far ahead on AoE. That's just not the experience that I've seen. We seem to be doing good AoE, good single target, and we've just taken that hit a little bit in survivability by losing Ancestral Guidance. So overall, I think we'll probably be considered about where we are now in Season 1, as about as good as we are in Season 2, probably a little bit worse, but overall I think we are definitely one of the better ranged options for Mythic Plus, but it's just a question of how the community perceives us. But I think Elemental will be more than fine as a pick for Mythic Plus. And that's pretty much everything that I wanted to touch on for this video. There's obviously a bunch of like frequently asked questions that people will probably ask about like best in slot and stats and like trinkets and crafting order. I will say, like, for as far as crafting, I'll probably wait until I can craft a two-handed weapon just to save on crests, because it's 60 crests instead of 120, and you're still getting both of those slots covered essentially of the shield and the one hand. Just crafting a two-handed intellect weapon probably better in this situation as opposed to Season 1. Because we don't have to worry about taking Thunderstrike Ward. Don't have to think about that anymore. So crafting a two-handed weapon, it will get replaced eventually, probably by something like best in slots, but that is a very rare drop. The chances of you getting that quickly is probably very low. So just going ahead and crafting a two-handed intellect weapon is probably fine to do on the surface. As far as like trinkets go, Eye of Kazan was like nerfed less than like 24 hours ago. Those things are going to be in flux for maybe another week or two. So really just kind of keep your ear to the ground. Look how sims are planning out. Always sim yourself for the best gear and your best stats and whatnot. But as of right now, Kazan's probably a good trinket. The Brutalizer trinket, which I believe is, I know I have it, there it is, Synergistic Brutalizer, might be a good trinket as well. And then House of Cards. But again, these things can change up to the last moment, so I wouldn't put too much stock into it right now. Haste is going to be looking a little bit better than it was, in the last season, but just by a little bit. Other than that, the stats are basically going to be largely the same. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below, or feel free to join my Discord as well if you want to reach out to me directly. I do stream at Twitch at twitch.tv/Ridmark, so feel free to hang out with me there as I do Mythic Plus and Raid. But other than that, guys, I hope you have a good one, and I will see you in the next video.